Thank you, Jonathan Metrick, for being here. Let me introduce you guys to Jonathan Metrick. This is actually kind of a slight twist because typically I bring on startup founders and marketing leaders, and Jonathan will talk about what he's up to with Wealthsimple. But Jonathan Metrick is Chief Growth Officer at Portage Ventures. It's a venture stage fintech investor. And he's also the Fractional Chief Growth Officer at Wealthsimple, which we'll talk about. Founded in 2014. It's about 518 people or so, and it's based out of Toronto in Canada. So Jonathan works with the portfolio of companies on marketing and growth at Portage Ventures. So he's got a lot of insights to share from that perspective. But as a investment firm, they're investing in Wealthsimple, which then they decided to bring Jonathan on to be the fractional CGO there. So let's talk about Wealthsimple. There's a lot of money going on there. So let's talk about on the funding side. $87 million raised in 2020, very recently, and that's on top of a previous raise of $190 million, and the total valuation is $1.3 billion, and I don't even understand like what that even means. So we'll talk about there's just like there's a lot going on in terms of like these days, right, with millennials and impacts of COVID and folks that are investing and thinking about, having enough money for the future. So I'm super excited to have you here so we can talk more about some of these trends and how there's so much growth happening with Wealthsimple. So I don't want to talk too much, but I do want to say a little bit more about Wealthsimple. It is investing on autopilot. And they build you a personal low-cost portfolio and put your money to work like the world's smartest investors. Who would not want that? I know I would love that. And they're on a mission to bring smarter financial services to everybody, regardless of your age, regardless of your net worth. And that's interesting, right? Because there's this idea of that people with a certain amount of money, they can have access to these amazing folks that can help them manage that money. But that's not the case with Wealthsimple. So that's really cool. And Wealthsimple manages $8.4 billion and has more than 1.5 million users. So I threw a lot of numbers out there, and it's really exciting to talk about this. Thank you for coming on here, Jonathan.
Absolutely. Nice to chat with you, Anna.
Yeah, great. So let's jump in. I have a lot to ask you because you've got this, you've got the experiences from a venture firm and also as the chief growth officer, fractional chief growth officer at Wealthsimple. So I'm going to ask you questions kind of related to both sides. But let's talk about you first. You have a really cool background, marketing for different brands. So that includes P&G, Live Nation, Hult International Business School, Policy Genius. So I would love to hear from you. Like, help me understand this. What were you looking for? What was your this path? What were you thinking about when you were kind of moving along this journey?
Yeah, great question. I think so. I've been working in marketing my entire career. And, back in the day, I'm dating myself over 15 years ago. If you wanted to work in marketing, which I did right out of undergrad or college, there was kind of the traditional consumer brands you would choose, right? It's like Coke, Pepsi, Unilever, or P&G. And so I chose Procter & Gamble and I went to work there. And it was, a great training ground for folks who were looking to really understand how does a big consumer brand go about marketing and building a global brand, right? And so I was working on brands like CoverGirl and Olay, and there was brand management school at Procter and Gamble. So you literally went to Cincinnati and did a week of training, and that was at the time the best place you could go to learn about marketing and the intrinsics of marketing. Those consumer packaged goods companies created the process of consumer research and doing consumer first understanding that then fed into product innovation, and really using the consumer as king or queen, or kind of guiding light of the business. And so that was great training ground. I pivoted next in my career to go work at Live Nation, which was a little bit more exciting, I think, than working on Procter & Gamble consumer products. When you get a chance to work with artists and music, I was in New York at the time, so there I was working, helping Fortune 50 brands amplify their product launches with music, right? So when Citibank, launches a new credit card, or, the new Microsoft wants to, do a product launch, when you put Rihanna in front of it, eureka, more people are paying attention to it than they would have maybe organically. So Live Nation was a little bit more around, doing marketing within a more exciting kind of trend-driven, sector. And that was absolutely the case. And then the last kind of 10 years of my career really have been in the startup space, right? So I went to work at Halt. Halt is a disruptor business school. It's a business school run by business people for business people. There's campuses all over the world. And we really tried to reimagine what the MBA experience could be. You could do it in 1 year. You could rotate between campuses around the world, between Shanghai, Dubai, San Francisco, New York, London, really trying to create global business and empowering people to actually experience global business while they were learning. And so that was really, I think, exciting for me, because I built out the marketing team there. I was the most senior marketing person at Halt and was tasked with kind of building out the function. And it was a disruptor brand, right? And for me, I'm very passionate about better solving consumer problems, right? And right back to the days of P&G, like understanding who is your consumer, what are they looking to get done, and how can you better meet those needs? And there's a lot of needs that are often unmet. Policy Genius, similar thing. They're an insurtech. They are disrupting the process of insurance. They're trying to create the Expedia of insurance. And I'm not sure if any folks on the podcast have ever tried to buy life insurance or disability insurance. It's very old school. I was faxing forms over to an agent in New Jersey and was like, wait a minute, it's the 2000s. How are we still faxing forms to people? And I think Policy Genius is trying to disrupt that market, create a marketplace, create more transparency, and save some folks some money. So I've really been kind of guided by I've always worked in marketing, but wanting to work in different areas of it. But most recently within the startup space and the disruptor space, really trying to better solve consumer problems. And I love doing that with startups.
I love it. That is a thread that I hear from different founders, where it's very exciting to disrupt. It's very exciting to transform like old ways of doing things and just crack that nut and move us forward. And that's what gets people pumped to be working at startups that are changing the game. So love that. Thank you so much for helping me understand all these different places that you've worked at. And from there, I'm sure lots of different learnings about marketing and what you could take with you. So now let's talk about quick pitch about Wealthsimple. So I talked a bit about it, but I'd love to hear from you. Who are you for, and what problem do you solve?
Yeah, absolutely. And so my current role, as we mentioned earlier, I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Portage Ventures, and one of our lead investments is Wealthsimple. And so Wealthsimple's tagline is get rich slow, right? And they offer financial tools to help folks grow and manage their money, right? And so this is especially pertinent in Canada, as one of the biggest markets they have in their focus area. It's dominated by 5 big banks, right? And they've been around for decades. And they really do leave a lot on the table for folks who are looking for digital first innovation and lower fees for banking services and design first experiences, right? So businesses like Amazon and Kayak have trained consumers in other categories to expect transparent pricing information, easy online transactions and signups, right? And when you look to financial services, that just simply isn't the case, right? And like insurance at Policy Genius, there's a lot that these incumbents that have been around for decades are leaving on the table. And I think there's room for innovation. I think there's room for better products and faster, more nimbler businesses to solve those for consumers. And so Wealthsimple, offers a variety of kind of financial tools, from investing, trading, tax, recently launched Cash App, which is kind of like Venmo for Canada, and trying to better solve those problems for Canadians.
So who's the main user at this point? Like, can you talk a little bit more about what is this person like? What are they up to? What are they thinking about? How old are they? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, when you take a look at a lot of fintechs, right, and Wealthsimple is one of the fintechs within our portfolio at Portage, oftentimes some of the first users of the category are a little bit more digital savvy, maybe kind of more millennial, even zennial, but it's not just age demographics, right? It's folks that are a little more digitally savvy. That can be someone who's, Gen X or a baby boomer that's tech savvy, and they're looking to Google to navigate or research, and they come across a new solution. And it's really folks that are looking for, better solutions, right? If it's someone who's, got the mindset of, okay, well, I was banked with this one bank and I've been there for 40 years, and I don't have the need to look for something better, cheaper, more innovative. That maybe not be the first person that is introduced to a new service like this. But for folks that are, wondering or maybe buying it for the first time, they start to do their research. They come across a different product. They're like, oh, interesting. I've never heard of this. What's that look like? And they get a referral from a friend. And that also is another good way of these kind of digital first disruptor businesses. There's a lot of referrals, right? Friends are, if they're navigating a new category like stock trading, they're kind of like, oh, my friend, is using this product and he told me about it, and so I should check it out. And that's often one of the ways you can get in front of folks. But I think it's people who are definitely, a little bit more digital first, but folks that are open to trying new experiences and maybe looking for a little bit better of an option than what currently exists in market.
Yeah, and so Wealthsimple is, like you mentioned, it's building your wealth and building your the amount of money you have, but slowly, right? So is it? It's not for the folks that are like, let's start trading and see some results like in the near weeks or months, right? It's definitely not that. It's more of a slow investing your money and not seeing any returns maybe until 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And is like, can you talk about the value that maybe folks that are digital first or millennials, like, do they see that value? What do you see from, I'm just curious myself, like how is that value built in where it's enticing for folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes back to education, right? And this is really one of the essence of the fintech sector, the insurtech sector, is, these are complicated industries, right? And no one wakes up in the morning, we always joked at Policy Genius, no one wakes up on a Saturday morning being like, I want to research insurance. I really want to think about insurance. But it's important. These are important categories. They're expensive. They're a little cumbersome. There's a lot of details that if you've never shopped them before, you don't know. And I think a lot of it comes back to education, right? And so I think, the get rich slow component of Wealthsimple, or other, kind of Borrowell's another portfolio company within the Portage family, they're helping educate folks around credit ratings and kind of, building your credit and paying off your bills on time. And a lot of it is education, right? And I think a lot of folks just don't know the value of, if you're saving consistently or compound interest, these sorts of things that, unfortunately, they don't always teach them in school. We learn a lot in school, but we don't know a ton about finance, as it turns out.
Or we just forget. We learn about it and we forget.
And I think that's a lot of the value that these kind of new fintech companies are bringing is, easier ways to educate the consumer that, doesn't involve having to go to a branch and listen to some person across a desk for 60 minutes in the middle of the day, or, meet some broker in a coffee shop on your Saturday, right? They're doing a better way of digesting this information, presenting this information, creating tools and calculators to help, showcase this. That's part of the process and the value.
Awesome. So you joined as the Fractional CGO about a year ago, and about a year ago, we were just finding out about COVID. I'm curious, like, did COVID speed things up for the business and the growth, or like what was going on during that time where they said, okay, Jonathan, we want you to take over because things are getting really crazy over here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, my role is a newer role at Portage. I've been doing it for about a year. And so my job within the portfolio is to assist our portfolio companies on matters related to marketing and growth. And it just so happened that, the week I onboarded was the first week that, we closed our offices, and, they sent me a computer saying, great, we're going to, close the office for a bit. You're going to onboard remotely for at least a week or two, which of course we've continued since. And so at that time, I think a lot of our portfolio companies were, you know, the environment radically changed, right? So consumers were no longer able to go into a branch. They were no longer able to, look to their traditional distribution mechanisms to get products and services. And that happened across the board, right? So the fintech companies throughout our portfolio, Albert in the US, Coho, which is kind of a neobank in Canada, Clark, which is kind of an insurtech or the Policy Genius of Europe, all of them found themselves in a situation where consumers were starting to look more online and in different ways for product solutions, right? And so the traditional incumbent businesses that maybe leveraged, the broker relationships they had down the street, or, you walk into your branch in the mall, those were no longer an option. And I think so that created an environment where folks who were and companies that were nimble enough to lean in and see this changing trend, had a solution that you could interact with digitally, really could take advantage of that. I think another area is, these bigger businesses were a little bit more risk averse, right? And they have to be, right? When you're the leading, when you're the Tide of laundry detergent, or you're the Pampers of, kind of diapers, you've got more to lose by taking a misstep and moving too quickly and trying something new than you have to gain. While as a disruptor, that is your opportunity, right? It is, you have lower stakes, you can move faster, hopefully you're looking at the data and you've got a bit of an experimentation culture where you can try things quicker and roll things out, right? So as new channels emerge, like TikTok, for example, the startups were the ones that were more active on that platform first, because it was a little bit more of the Wild West, right? You're like, wait, there's this new platform and we don't really know how to advertise on it, but there was a lot of people using it and the cost of advertising was really cheap. And so for a period of time, you could really get in front of a lot of consumers pretty cheaply. And the startups were the ones that took advantage of that.
Yep. Awesome. All right. So let's talk about Wealthsimple and dig a little bit deeper then. What's the marketing team look like?
Yeah, so I think, typically what you'll see at most kind of direct to consumer startups, and this is an ongoing question, is how do you structure the marketing team, right? And I think most teams are structured kind of there's the brand team that kind of does more of the creative, asset creation, consumer piece. And then there's a little bit more of the growth side of the team that does channel management, performance marketing. And, those two are typically kind of, working together, but there are two teams. And, that's what I see a lot, similar at Policy Genius, at the majority of the portfolio companies that I work with. That's kind of how the teams are structured. And it makes sense to some degree because the skill sets are different, right? So the folks that maybe are making a TV commercial or, designing the graphics, aren't the same folks that are running the marketing attribution model or creating, the campaigns for Google paid search, right? And so there's different skill sets, and it's natural that there would be kind of different teams that tackle that. One thing I am seeing though is there is a need for kind of a blending of the two worlds, right? I think for the last 5 or 7 years in marketing, there's really been kind of the growth camp that has been tackling the kind of expansion and the rapid expansion of performance marketing, Google, Facebook, marketing attribution, and then the kind of traditional marketing or brand camp that has been managing consumer, above the line marketing, TV, print, experiential, and those have operated kind of separately. Increasingly, I think we're going to be seeing a world where those two camps need to come together, because it's getting so much easier now for folks to, everyone's on Facebook, everyone's on Instagram, everyone's on Google, paid search. To differentiate, you've got to be on those channels, but in a kind of brand first, consumer first way. And I think there's going to need to be a kind of merging of the two for folks who are really going to do best in market this year and next.
Yeah, so really integrate those both of those things. Do you so you have both those teams, right? Brand and growth, and you're probably thinking of like how to integrate them together. How many people are on the marketing team? Just looking at like some more specific things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, the size of marketing teams really does kind of vary as you scale up, right? So I think as you get bigger and bigger, you kind of start to layer in more folks on, initially there's 1 or 2 people who are managing all channels. Then you get to a spend threshold where you're like, all right, maybe we actually need a dedicated Facebook person, and maybe we need a dedicated Google, kind of paid search and SEO. And, eventually you could then get to a point where you might have those resources by product line, right? So it could be, okay, great. This is not, we offer multiple products, and the consumer set of who's buying, a tax product might be pretty different than someone who's investing, right? If you're if you're a teenager or a college student, you probably need to file taxes if you're working, but you may not be investing, right? And that could be an older product, and that consumer might be slightly different. And so do you need different resources stacked accordingly? And so I think, we continue to expand on the Wealthsimple side, expand the growth team, obviously expand the marketing team in lockstep with, as we raise more funding, as we're getting in front of more consumers, we continue to expand that. But it really is kind of in lockstep with the business. But you also want efficiencies, right? There are, you don't want to just, okay, great, we're doubling the business, and we'll continue to double the size of the marketing team and the sales team and the engineering team. Eventually, you want to get a bit more efficient to scale up.
Yep. That makes sense. So let's talk about then on the marketing side, you've got a lot of money raised, right? You've got some really smart, awesome people on both the brand and the growth side. What's working really well for you right now? Like what are you guys doing to within your marketing strategy and within your growth? What levers are you pulling? What channels are you using? Let's get a little bit deeper there.
Yeah. So again, I'm pretty bullish, and you're seeing a lot of activity on, which I mentioned a little earlier, influencer channels like TikTok, right? And so there's a few reasons for that. One is, I think no matter what business you are, and if you're a startup or even a bigger business, the goal should be to try and, first of all, hopefully you know who your consumer is, and you've got a product, and you should have a pretty clear sense of, okay, who does that product add value for, and who's that target that we want to get in front of? So that's important. But then the next phase is, well, how do you get in front of them cheaper than other people, right? And like, what channel does that look like? What is, CPMs, which is cost per mil, how much does it cost to get in front of 1,000 people? You want to look for the channels that give you the cheapest and the lower CPMs versus your competition. And so oftentimes that can happen with an emerging channel, right? Because there's a bunch of what I call channel arbitrage. It's too early in the days of a channel to know what is best practice. There's still a lot of kind of testing, and some things are going to work, some things aren't. Who are the best influencers in this new channel? We don't know. It's only been around for 6 or 12 months. So I'm bullish on channels like TikTok that are new and emerging. The other component that I find very interesting around these kind of influencer-driven channels, especially for categories like fintech, is they allow you to provide a little bit more context. It's kind of a trusted source of information, if you will. Policy Genius, we did really well with host-read podcast spots because, the listeners of the podcast obviously like the host and would often respect their opinion on different areas. And if they could give them a bit more information as to kind of what the product was, how you use it, what the benefit is, there's a little more real estate for you to explain what you do. And I think as a disruptor, as a startup, as a scale up, not everybody knows your brand, right? So you can't just like throw a kind of quirky image and put your logo like Coke can and great, everyone's like, yeah, I love Coke, let's go buy a Coke. You got to have a little bit more real estate to explain yourself. In an influencer channel like TikTok, like Instagram, like YouTube, you've got a little bit more time for the influencer to explain the product, and hopefully to an audience that is open to hearing advice from them.
Okay, that's great. So you're using a lot of social channels and trying to find those influencers to spread. Is it more of like a spread the message, like help people become aware of Wealthsimple and the things that you can do if you sign up, if you start using the tool. Is that sort of the goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, in the earliest days and when you're working with startups, you've got to be really clear, and folks can kind of say it's a little bit more direct response type messaging, but you've got to be clear about what you do and who you are, right? It's, has every single person heard about Wealthsimple? No, not yet, hopefully, but probably not, right? And has everybody heard of Policy Genius or Albert in the US? No, you have to explain, who you are, what you do, and why someone would want to potentially use you. And so I think that's kind of some of the key messaging. And once you get that across, of course, you want to do it in a differentiated way, hopefully a little bit more interesting, maybe funny, or whatever elements of your brand you want to lean into. But it is critical that you have that key bits of information get across. And you'd be surprised at the number of companies that just don't do that, and even bigger companies, right? I've worked with very large, multi-billion-dollar brands that I think get really caught up in the kind of like fun, different, quirky, like let's try and win a ad at Cannes, an award at Cannes, creativity festival. But then actually you watch the ad and you're like, who is that for? Or oftentimes, if they are going against a competitor, people will be like, oh, that was for State Farm, right? And it was actually for a rival insurance company. So it's like, you're really not getting the message across. You might be creating some cool advertising, but do people really understand what you do and why there may be a benefit to buying or using the product?
Yeah. Are you guys getting on Clubhouse, doing any sort of Clubhouse spots, talking with folks about, building your wealth?
Yeah, no, I think actually Michael, the CEO, I think is doing a segment tonight on Clubhouse about kind of retail trading. So you should check that out. But yeah, great. I mean, again, this is another example of a new emerging channel, right? And this is, for me, what's so exciting for brands to lean into these spaces is because it's undetermined. What is the best way to advertise on Clubhouse? I don't know. Is it by having a Q&A? Is it by, I don't know, doing a teardown or comparison of the top, that's to be determined, right? And I think that's exciting for brands that are willing to lean in, do some testing, trial and error. And, once you find something that works, you've got some runway to play with that, because, the Citibanks of the world are not leaning in as the first advertisers in Clubhouse. They've got more to lose by doing it wrong than doing it right. So take advantage of that dynamic if you can.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. It is hard though to take people away from what they're used to. So with the big banks, right? That's probably, so you really need to hone in on that message and almost, I don't know, like think about what you want to say. Is it like that, just knowing the pain points that these people are experiencing, or going really hard on like the benefits that they don't have with their current model? So I think that's probably one of the challenges, but I guess I'll ask you that instead of coming up with my own challenges for you. What would you say are the biggest challenges? Like, what are you guys trying to figure out on the marketing front and the growth front right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it gets back to, kind of the discussion a little earlier around consumer, right? So as much as marketing has changed, dramatically in the last 10 years with the expansion of performance marketing and more data to make better decisions around, when you're spending on Facebook or Google, you've got a little bit more of a clearer sense of what you're getting out of that versus back in the day when you were kind of triangulating PR reach or the impact of a sponsorship at some sort of kind of sporting event. That's been great, but the core essence of the marketing function hasn't changed. And that's back to what problem are you solving for your consumer and what value are you adding to them, right? And so, when you're going onto these new channels, you have to have an understanding of that, right? And so I'll use, Policy Genius as an example. We did a ton of consumer, research. I led the group there, and we would do that every quarter where we'd speak to our consumers, back when you could do focus groups in person, but I'm sure you can do them on Zoom now. And so, you'd speak with them, and part of, what the real value that we uncovered, that we delivered, was that we made it, easier for them to do everything as it came to insurance, easier to understand, easier because it was all in one place, easier to price comparison shop, and then just easier to get it done, right? People wanted to just get the insurance, life insurance as an example. They didn't want to spend like 3 months looking for it. They wanted to make sure they were getting a good deal, making sure that they were getting the right product, and then to get it done. And so this ease factor was pretty important in making sure they got it right. And so once you know that, you can then apply that into the channel, right? Being like, okay, well, if consumers are really focused in on ease or saving money or the latest, newest thing, then you can, kind of start to have a little fun with that. Maybe you have a discussion topic around the latest trends, or you lean into ways you can save money. Like that's going to then lean into these kind of core value that you're delivering to your consumer and what they're looking for.
So is that the challenge that you guys are still tackling? Like let's get down to like, what is the message? What is the value we bring? What is like that main challenge that you're trying to tackle? Like the biggest one?
Yeah. I mean, I think on the Wealthsimple front, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of, the goal is to help folks get rich slow by providing tools to help you grow and manage your money, right? And I think there's a big piece around, and I'm the same, and not maybe, Anna, you're maybe more organized than I am, but there's still a lot of questions that I have related to finance, right? To financial services. There's a lot of new categories you come in, and every year, it's coming up to tax time, and you're like, like, did I do it
No,
right
I'm the same way. Yeah.
So there's a lot of help, I think, that folks are still looking for, these categories. And this is across fintech, right? They're complicated, they're cumbersome, they're not fun usually, right? Like no one wakes up on the weekend wanting to do their taxes or want to think about their investments. And I think, there's a lot of education that can still happen there. And there's also value to be created, right? I think when you take a look at what are some of the fees that are attached to these more legacy banks and insurance companies, when you start to double click into them, you're like, well, why is there a fee every time I send money to a different bank? Why is that? Like should that be the case? I don't know, right? It's always been there, but should it be? All these sorts of things start to, create some value for consumers. So I think it's improving a category that I think consumers traditionally haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about, may not know a lot about, but it's an important one because it involves their money.
Mm-hmm. Very important. I would agree with you. All right, let's talk about. We did talk a little bit about COVID and when you started, as the fractional CGO. How has COVID affected your marketing strategy? Like, what were they doing before, and maybe what has changed now? Like, what are you planning to do differently or do more of? And maybe this has to do with, guys, let's start getting into some of these emerging channels and be the first to kind of figure them out, because it's kind of cheap right now, and we can do a lot of cool things there that nobody else is doing.
Yeah, I think honestly the biggest piece is really, watching the evolving consumer behavior change, right? And no one knows that, right? Like we're hopefully, knock on wood, on the cusp of getting some of these vaccines rolled out and getting more of the population protected. Well, what will that mean for consumer behavior, right? No one predicted in March 2020 that the world would shut down, everyone would be on Zoom, no one would be going into the office unless you were an essential service. And then what did that mean, right? We saw the rise of brands like Peloton, who are like at-home workouts, right? Or Zoom, right? Like now we're doing all of our meetings on this kind of, Skype-esque platform. And so I think that the one real outstanding question that we're in now is, how is that going to evolve once we've got some of these vaccines? Are folks going to still look to the same digital channels? Like, is TikTok going to be as big? Are people going to be spending as much time on social as they were, when they couldn't go out, couldn't go to the gym, couldn't go to the bars, couldn't, travel, or not? Right. And so I think the important thing is for brands to be, again, really understanding what's happening with their consumer and looking at the data, right? And I think it's, as you're seeing changing trends, how do you get in front of that? How do you adapt? How do you try something new to take advantage of the fact that maybe more folks are going to be doing a hybrid of, maybe they want to do all of their discovery online and through a digital service, but then maybe they'll do the final close talking to a real person in life. Maybe there's a hybrid version. What does that look like? And so I think that's the biggest outstanding question at the moment. Yes, of course, there's new channels that are popping up. Yes, there's going to be new ways of getting in front of consumers, but it's still fluid. It's still moving because the environment continues to change pretty rapidly. So I think watching the consumer behavior, watching the data, and being nimble enough to try new approaches as that behavior changes.
Yeah, that is so important. And I have similar questions. And I think that it all comes down to like, why would people change back to the old way unless there was something that they really needed in that old way that they miss? So maybe people really do miss that in-person interaction. So they're going to go back to that, but maybe not. They're like, this is way better. I don't really need someone on the other side of that table to discuss my finances. I'm just happy getting this done. And this is easy and this is fast and this is cheaper. I don't know. So yeah, that's really interesting. I want to ask you about now your experience with Portage, and you're working with different startups. You're helping them figure out marketing and growth of the portfolio companies. What are the top things that you look for when you invest in the startup? How do you think about it? How does the firm think about it? Because I work with startups, and some of them are in the middle of raising money and they're busy working on their pitch decks, and it's such a stressful process. So maybe there's some sort of helpful advice that you can give on here.
Yeah. So I think, one of the biggest things, which of course makes sense, when you're running a marketing team, the biggest piece is the people and the team. And if you've got the right team, everything else kind of takes care of itself. And it's the same I think in the startup investing world, right? I think the number one thing that folks look at is the team, right? And it's, do they have the right folks in the room? Do they have the right roles? How do they work together? And if they don't have the right, all the right people, and that's okay. They're a startup, they're still growing. Do they know what they need, right? Are they aware of their blind spots? Those sorts of pieces are often one of the biggest kind of, components. Secondly, I think is, at least on my side, I do some due diligence with a lot of the kind of firms that we might invest in. And I kind of double click in with the prospective investments on their marketing and growth infrastructure. And for me, it's, how well do they really understand their consumer, right? And does their product, overlay and better solve that challenge or better solve that problem for the consumer or not, right? And I think, that's an important piece because, oftentimes your product is going to change, right? Like, a lot of folks, I don't know, you've worked closely with startups, Anna, but, often when you start a business, you may think you're going to do one thing, but fast forward a few months or years and you may be doing something slightly different. And so I think it's, it's the knowledge of like, how closely do you consumer? Do you understand their needs? Are you trying to actually create value for them? Or are you just kind of really tunnel visioned into, I've got this product and it's so amazing and I'm just going to force fit it into wherever it fits? That's not so much the approach. So I think understanding the consumer, the kind of real value that the product is bringing. And then the last piece is, in the venture side of things, these investments are not for one quarter, right? These are for years. It's a long-term partnership. And so I think folks need to be open and interested and willing to have, accept feedback, right? And like, we're in this together, right? Like my role is, the portfolio companies don't pay me to work with them. I'm not a consultant. I'm really just here to help, right? And so it's kind of we when they do well, we do well, and vice versa. And so I think for being open to feedback and coaching, and we're all in this together. We want to try and create the best business we possibly can for the consumers. But are you open to working with other folks, or are you pretty closed off and kind of, we're going to do this and just like trust us and we'll talk to you next year? That's probably not the best dynamic for a venture stage investment.
I love that. This is definitely really worthy of a clip sort of advice and what you look for. And it goes back to like the people for the most part, right? Like your team is the people, understanding the consumer is a person, and then a partnership is like the relationship between people. So it really just comes down to like the fit of the people, which is great.
Yeah.
I love that you explain that a bit more. We have time for one more, and I'd love to understand, like for Portage Ventures and what you're doing for them. You work with portfolio companies, you're helping them out with their marketing and growth. Do you also do that for Portage? Are you also figuring out, like, how do you split your time and how do you think about that? Is it similar or different from like helping the startups that you work with?
Yeah, no, for sure. So my role is split kind of in three. And so the majority of my time, the vast majority of my time is spent with our portfolio companies and helping their CMOs, or their heads of marketing or their CEO, if they don't have that yet, really chart out kind of marketing and growth. And that can be annual planning, channel selection, marketing attribution, new email service, a variety of, you can imagine as many pieces that can pop up. The next piece of my work is then due diligence. And so if we are considering investing in a new firm that would join our portfolio, and marketing is going to be a big piece of their mix, I'll lean in and kind of meet those folks before we potentially extend an investment to them to get an assessment of kind of how do we feel about them and that side of the business. The last piece then is also supporting our fund, right? So at the end of the day, Portage is still a business, right? And we have, consumers, and those are twofold. One is of the folks that, are LPs that invest in Portage, that give us capital to then invest in startups. And vice versa is the folks that we then invest in, right? And so it's both parties, the startup and us have to agree that we want to create a partnership and want to work together. And, our marketing and branding plays into that. So I do lean in and assist on things like brand management of Portage and PR, and how do we come across and think about things like our marketing mix and our website. But that's a smaller chunk of my time. But I, as a marketer in a firm that's not filled with marketing folks, I often get asked a couple of those things.
That makes sense. So you do wear a lot of hats and internally as well. So awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jonathan. I loved getting your perspective here because you have been working like for Wealthsimple, obviously in there and understanding the inner workings there, but also across different portfolio companies for Portage Ventures and getting an understanding of like, what advice do you have for startups to raise funding, which is top of mind right now for many of them. So I appreciate you. Thank you for spending your time here. You're like a powerhouse of knowledge. So thank you again, and look forward to seeing where your growth and marketing efforts lead you.
Awesome. Great chatting, Anna. I loved it.